On a far from fine evening, an Italian navyman picked up his binoculars from a commercial oil vessel called Enrica Lexi, and through them he saw a small fishing boat very far away from the vessel. And when he saw it again after a few moments, the boat came a little closer, and thereafter it only kept coming closer and closer. The vessel was near the coast of Kerala, and this zone was recently declared as a piracy zone. After the boat came closer, the Marines went on full alert. They ordered all the crew members to take shelter. They got their equipment hot and ready, and when the boat approached close enough, they turned on the alarm and two Italian Marines launched fire from a heavy mounted machine gun. There was an uninterrupted volley of bullets for full 100 seconds, and as a result of which, two fishermen died with uncontrolled bleeding. The fishing boat then changed its course away from the vessel, and the Italian vessel calmly continued its voyage to Egypt. When the Maritime Coordination Center in Mumbai was informed about the crime, it tracked down the Italian ship and directed it to return to Kochi for investigation. As soon as the vessel arrived and immediately after a preliminary investigation, the Marines were informed that they were booked for murder. The Marines refused to cooperate and they claimed that they are Italian military men on duty and they directly work for Italian military and they're not answerable to Indian authorities. But the Indian police didn't budge and the Italian Marines were remanded to the local magistrate. Now, the big question here is, since the Marines were stationed on the vessel by the Italian military to save these vessels from any potential pirate attacks, these military men were officially discharging their duties, at least for as long as they're on the vessel and trying to protect the vessel. And since this act was done in that course, they're saved from the operation of Indian law, right? It's a little more complicated than that. On top of these, between these existing complications, the case first reached the Supreme Court and then it went to the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And Indians refusing to drop charges became a bone of contention between Italy and India. And this led to Italian ambassador being detained. Yeah, the Italian ambassador being detained by none other than the Supreme Court of India. This happened when the Marines went on bail to Italy and then refused to return to India. Again, in the Supreme Court, a fierce legal battle ensued between Haris Salve and the Advocate General of India. And their arguments, which we'll deeply analyze along with the judgments of the Supreme Court and a little of the Permanent Court of Arbitration's award. So, have a hearing to find out. You're listening to Hamlet of Law, a legal podcast where we discuss judgments of Indian courts, the laws, policies, and the history behind these laws and policies, and everything official to judicial. A country has to have a set limit until where its laws can be extended in the waters, because seas and oceans are infinitely big and not doing so would get a country into trouble. So all the countries came together and decided these limits through a United Nations convention called UNCLOS. And under this treaty, a country with a sea coast is called a coastal state. And it created 3 zones in the sea where laws apply differently in each zone. And so all of the area covering 12 nautical miles from a coast is called territorial waters. And here in these territorial waters, a coastal state can enforce all of its laws absolutely without any restriction on any country's ship. The next 12 nautical miles after the territorial waters, that is from the 12 nautical mile mark to the 24 nautical mile mark, is called a contiguous zone. And in this contiguous zone, the coastal state can enforce laws on any country's ship to prevent only the following things: customs, fiscal, immigration, and sanitary laws. That's it. It be theft, rape, assault, or murder, the coastal state can do anything because it's not covered under these 4 heads. Then all of the area from the coast until the 200 nautical mile mark is something called an exclusive economic zone, which I'll be referring to as economic zone. So territorial waters and contiguous zone are part of the economic zone. And here, the coastal state, in this zone, in the economic zone, the coastal state has exclusive rights to commercially exploit the area. It's either by extracting all the minerals, or catching the fish, or establishing wind farms, oil and mineral rigs. All of these things, only the coastal state can do it. And after this 200 nautical mile mark, it's something called the high seas, and the coastal state can't enforce its laws no matter what. And these high seas are cordially called the common heritage of the mankind, because no country can enforce its laws and freedom of navigation prevails here, and it belongs to every single country. So, a country can enforce its laws fully and completely in the territorial waters, the first 12 nautical miles, and partly in the next 12 miles, that is the contiguous zone. And after that, until the economic zone, a coastal state can only commercially exploit that region. But, this is a big but, one exception for application of jurisdiction in all these zones, that territorial, contiguous, and economic, is that a coastal state can exercise its jurisdiction on a foreign ship if the consequences of events on such ship would affect the coastal state. And these are very extreme and usually have an importance of national security. So we can ignore it. These are not the things that we can usually see. Another big element in international law is where a ship is registered, because the place where a ship is registered determines which country's laws would apply when the ship was on the high seas. This is because the high seas belong to all the countries. So there's no concrete jurisdiction in sea, but all the places or persons, including ships, must subject themselves to some or the other country's laws. So, on this regard, ship owners have the right to choose which country's laws they would comply with, and they register their ships in that country. And this country where the ship is registered, and which is called the flag state, this flag state alone has full exclusive jurisdiction in case of any misdeeds on board of such registered ship. And in this case, this ship was registered in Italy. So in 1982, all these demarcations were settled among nations through the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is called UNCLOS. I've mentioned it before. And India too, along with other countries, ratified it. However, while ratifying the UN clause, India had made a declaration that, in its view, in the economic zone, UN clause does not authorize any state to carry out, and I quote, military exercises or maneuvers without consent of India. And India also opted out to settle disputes arising out of interpretation of UN clause in a manner which it deems fit, when all the other countries went ahead with ITLOS, International Tribunal on the Law of the Seas. And on the military exercise aspect, even Italy opted the same. Even Italy didn't want any military exercises or maneuvers without the consent of Italy. And we're discussing so much about UN clause. It's interesting to know that the United States isn't even a party to UN clause, but its domestic legislation is in line with UN clause. US is a weird state. So one interesting thing here is the limitations and the extent of jurisdictions of UN clause was consolidated in India even before ratifying the UN clause, because the legislation was based on draft of UN clause, and this legislation is called the Maritime Zones Act 1976. And this act was enacted by Parliament after 40th Amendment to the Constitution, and this 40th Amendment empowered the Union of India to act on all things of value in the exclusive economic zone. But one way in which the Maritime Zones Act differed from the treaty is it empowered the Union of India to extend the application of any law it chooses, and all the way until the 200 nautical mile mark, that is in all of exclusive economic zone. That too despite the treaty, despite UN clause limiting it to the territorial waters. And the Union of India exercised this power, and it extended the Indian Penal Code to the economic zone through a notification in 1981. On the side of piracy, over 70% of international trade is carried out through marine transport, and a few ships sometimes contain goods worth thousands of crores. So hijacking fleets and merchant vessels has become the most lucrative business for political and organized criminal rebels. And these criminal rebels are very well trained to forcefully embark on a ship and take the seafarers as hostages and demand ransom. And this has been the job of pirates for hundreds of years. So, piracy is not as simple and silly as most of us think it is. And the perfect depiction of piracy on merchant vessels is depicted in this phenomenal Tom Hanks movies called Captain Phillips. And piracy was so menacing and crucial back in the day, so much so that the Constitution of the United States has a dedicated article on piracy. Especially in the past decade, there has been an increase in acts of piracy in Indian Ocean region. So, to protect Italian ships against pirate attacks, the Italian government has deployed military detachments on Italian commercial vessels, and a detachment was also stationed on Enrica Lexi. And these marines, all of these detachments were on the payroll of the Italian government, so they're not answerable to captains of any of these ships. Now, here's where the incident starts. On Feb 15, 2012, Enrica Lexi started its voyage from Singapore to Egypt. And when it was sailing close to Kerala coast, approximately 20.5 nautical miles, that is in the contiguous zone, the Marines stationed on Enrica Lexi saw a small boat approaching Enrica Lexi. And once it was close enough, just 200 meters from the vessel, the Italian Marines opened fire. The ship that was shot at was a fishing boat called Saint Anthony, and on board of it were 11 sailors. And as a result of the shooting, 2 out of the 11 sailors died. Generally, fishermen in Kerala sail for a week or two and then return to the coast. And the day of this incident was unfortunately the last day of their voyage, and the fishermen were returning to the coast. Subsequently, when the police were informed by the Kerala fishermen who were still on the ship, they communicated it to the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center in Mumbai, which again analyzed the recent ship movements, and it anticipated that Enrica Lexi was a ship from where the rounds were fired. And the Maritime Center ordered Enrica Lexi to anchor at Kochi to help it in investigation. By this time, Enrica Lexi was some 38 nautical miles away from the coast, and later it was intercepted by Indian Coast Guard, and Indian Coast Guard escorted Enrica Lexi to the Kochi coast. As soon as it was close to the coast, 36 police officers entered Enrica Lexi to investigate, and they walked towards the uniformed Marines and informed that they were being investigated for murder and sought a few answers. The Marines declined to answer, and then they started arguing that they are discharging official duties of Italian Navy and that they're exclusively answerable to the Italian judiciary. And they refused to cooperate. Later, the Italian Consul General arrived at the port and convinced them to cooperate with the investigating authorities, and the Marines complied. Later, Indian authorities requested them to anchor the ship, but the captain refused and wanted to stay moored because once a ship is anchored, it officially subjects itself to all the laws of that country. And anchoring a ship has serious legal repercussions, so the captain of the ship didn't want to anchor. But when the Indian authorities officially ordered them to anchor in India, they first communicated it to the Italian authorities, and then after getting their approval, they finally anchored in India. As soon as it was anchored in India, an FIR was filed by the Circle Inspector on the Marines, charging them with murder under the Indian Penal Code. When the Marines were charged with murder, they applied for bail, unsurprisingly, in lower courts. And when the lower court rejected the bail, they appealed to the High Court, which granted them the bail. But the High Court asked them to stay within 10-kilometer vicinity of the police station. And the High Court also asked them to report to the police station every day between 10 and 11 am. And while on bail, the Marines filed a writ petition in Kerala High Court challenging the jurisdiction of Kerala to try the case. And subsequently, it filed a writ under Article 32 challenging India's jurisdiction, the Union of India's jurisdiction. The Kerala High Court actually upholds India's jurisdiction to try the case, and Italy again challenges this High Court judgment in the Supreme Court through an SLP. And the Supreme Court then merges this case with the one filed under Article 32. And then hears it together. Meanwhile, in February 2012, the families of the deceased fishermen filed an admiralty suit seeking compensation in Kerala High Court. And the next month, they reach an out of the court settlement where Italy compensated rupees 1 crore to the families of deceased and 17 lakhs to the owner of the ship. Later in May 2012, the Supreme Court then also allows Enrica Lexi to leave India with the remaining crew except the two Marines after executing a bond of 3 crores before the High Court of Kerala, along with an assurance that they would produce the vessel and ensure the appearance of the crew as and when called by the police or the trial court. And Italy also assured the Supreme Court that it would comply with it. And the Supreme Court also allowed the remaining two Italian sailors to reside in Italian embassy in Delhi. Interestingly, Enrica Lexi has changed its name to Olympic Sky after the incident, and now it flies the flag of Marshall Islands. And I'll be referring to states inside India as state units and India's central government as union government. And also sovereign immunity or state immunity, which was claimed by the Italian Marines. It saves individuals excising state duties from any criminal prosecution anywhere in the world because they were excising state duties and states can do no wrong. And this case in the Supreme Court was heard before CJI, the Chief Justice of India, Altamas Kabir back then, and also Justice Chalameshwar. Italy was represented by Haris Salve and India was represented by none other than the Advocate General of India. So let's begin it. Salve flagged off his arguments, pun intended, by contending that in this case there exists a question of official immunity because the incident involved the actions of Italian Marines discharging their military duties in their official capacity. So they were entitled to the commonly accepted principle of sovereign immunity or the official immunity. And since the Marines claim this official or sovereign immunity, Salve argued, the determination of the extent of immunity is a prerogative of union government alone. So as a result of this, because union government is involved, this incident elevates to an issue between two independent sovereign countries. But in this case, Kerala's Circle Inspector arrested the Marines, and Kerala's Circle Inspector is an officer of State of Kerala, not union government. And Kerala being a federal unit within a country, it cannot directly interact with another sovereign country, and in this case, Italy. Then Salve continued, this also accepted an established customary international law and a resolution of the United Nations, which require that if conduct of a foreign citizen exercising his official duty is an issue, nations, federal units shall not be a party to these disputes and they shall only be between two sovereign nations. And in this case, Kerala initiating criminal proceedings is illegal because there's no relationship between Italy and Kerala, and the prolonged detention of Italian Marines is illegal and it blatantly violates international law and Constitution of India. This was the first argument of Salve. Salve then explained all the provisions of the Maritime Zones Act and the delineation of the extent of jurisdiction, and he acknowledged that the union government is empowered to extend the application of laws until the exclusive economic zone, but only after having regard to international law. But he also argued that parallelly Maritime Zones Act allows any ship to have the right to innocent passage, but again with a but, so long as such passage was innocent and not prejudicial to the peace, good order or security of India. Salve also contended that since the incident didn't take place in the territorial waters but in the contiguous zone, it can be said that the incident occurred in state of Kerala because after the extension of laws through the 1981 notification, the act didn't empower the states to enforce these laws. And because legislative power and executive power coexist and the power to extend these laws was conferred with the union government alone had the jurisdiction to enforce these laws. And even if there is an incident, union government at its discretion must initiate proceedings and not the state governments. Salve then continued, even the fact that the union government is privy to all these events surrounding this incident is a breach of duty by the union government because union government is party to multiple customary laws. Salve then argued if we leave these domestic legislations apart, the arrest would still be legal because India is a party to UN clause, and UN clause recognizes the primacy of the flag state in excising criminal jurisdiction. And since Italy is a flag state of Enrica Lexi, Italy alone has the right to try the Marines. And in addition to this, under Article 24 of UN clause, ships of all countries have the right to innocent passage. So, even if these ships sail through territorial waters of a coastal state, that coastal state shall not hamper the ship's navigation unless the ship violates certain conditions or if the actions of the ship or on board of the ship are detrimental to the coastal state. In the same UN clause, flag states are given the right to try cases occurring on board of the ship, even if the ship was in the territorial waters of other country, and the coastal states can't exercise their jurisdiction on such ship unless, and I repeat, unless the consequences of such crime on board of the ship extends to the coastal state. And Salve further argued that since the act didn't have any consequences on the peace of the coastal state, that is India, it cannot attract the criminal jurisdiction of India. And he continued, UN clause allows a country to exercise its rights in the contiguous zone only if the ship violates customs, fiscal, immigration or sanitary regulations of such coastal country, in this case India's custom, immigration and fiscal laws. And since the incident doesn't qualify for any of these conditions, India can claim jurisdiction on the Marines. Then Salve pointed out that UN clause also mandates that states shall conduct a standard inquiry into every marine casualty or incident of navigation. And he argued the flag state and other states shall cooperate with that inquiry. Another very crucial and very relevant provision of UN clause is that in case of any judicial proceedings concerning the incident of navigation, only the flag state and their official judiciary shall have the right to try the individuals involved in such incident. Then Salve continued that it is true that the Union government is empowered by Section 3 of the Maritime Zones Act to extend the applications of IPC and consequentially CRPC in all of the economic zone. But this extension is not at all in consonance with UN clause. Salve also pointed out that the Indian ship Saint Anthony was not registered under the Indian Merchant Shipping Act, so it's not under the flag of India. And second, he also argued that the region was declared as high pirate risk zone by various international organizations. And keeping this in mind, Italian government and the Italian Shipping Association entered into an agreement with the Italian government where the Italian Navy would station a few Marines on the vessels, on these commercial vessels, on the condition that the Marines would be fully independent and are not answerable to the master of such ship. And when the fishing boat named Saint Anthony came close to Enrica Lexi, the Marines, while discharging their official duties and trying to avert a potential hijacking, opened fire thinking that the approaching ship to be a pirate vessel, and such firing resulted in death of 2 sailors in Saint Anthony. So they were acting in their official capacity as mandated by the Italian military. Salve then referred to Eben Lloyd's case where the Supreme Court categorically held that India does not have full rights with respect to the economic zone, but India can only exercise sovereign rights not amounting to sovereignty, and India's jurisdiction is limited by the Maritime Zones Act. Salve continued, the reason why India can't exercise sovereign rights is because freedom of navigation is a crucial part of international law, and rights of other countries' citizens to peacefully navigate in waters cannot be curbed by other coastal countries without a just cause. So, a country can't impose its laws on people who are sailing through waters with no intention to enter such coastal country. Salve then argued, now keeping in mind the decision of the Eben Lloyd's case, provisions of the Maritime Zones Act should be read in harmony with UN clause. Here, he further argued, since the Eben Lloyd's case deals with the policing powers in the designated areas of the contiguous zone for the application of the Customs Act and not as a reference to general policing powers exercised by the state police as in the case in the current situation, it is clear that if an offence was committed beyond contiguous zone, the state concerned could not proceed beyond 24 nautical miles from the baseline in pursuit of such vessel which is alleged to have committed the offence. And Maritime Zones Act does not confer any policing powers on the coastal state in the zones beyond the contiguous zone. So, the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center in Mumbai ordering Enrica Lexie to dock Enrica Lexie in the coast of Kochi is ultra wise, and their order is not backed by any law. Salve then argued the stand taken by the Union of India that the Maritime Zones Act is a domestic legislation enacted by the Parliament and is in no way related to UN clause is entirely misconceived. Because India ratified UN clause, India is a party to UN clause, and the Maritime Zones Act was enacted based entirely on the draft of UN clause in 1976. And if we juxtapose the provisions of UN clause in the Maritime Zones Act, they are exactly the same. Even the nature of rights available to India in respect of each of the zones is in complete consonance, is in complete conformity with the UN clause. And since India ratified the convention, India is a party to it, the municipal law must be read in harmony with UN clause unless there were express provisions to the contrary. Salve then continued, if it is accepted that the parliament enacted a legislation to give effect to delineate zones and excise jurisdictions in accordance with UN clause, the sovereign rights which are to be exercised by India in the said zones must be read subject to UN clause. So, accordingly, Article 27 of UN clause prohibits the coastal state from exercising its criminal jurisdiction on any ship unless a few conditions are met, and in this case none of these conditions were met. So India is clearly wrong in exercising its criminal jurisdiction. Salve then argued, since India invoked the Indian Penal Code to charge the Marines because the crime was committed on a ship with Indian flag from a ship carrying an Italian flag, India should similarly respect equal and identical rights of Italy to try offences occurring on their vessels carrying their own flag. And this right is spelled out in Article 21 of UN clause. So, if an incident occurs on a ship exercising its right to innocent passage, and in such incident if two ships with different flags are involved, and if such event has no ramifications whatsoever on the coastal state, and in this case India, any exercise of such criminal jurisdictions by the coastal state, again in this case India, violates the right of innocent passage of other vessels. Salve then mentioned the famous Lotus decision in 1930s where a French vessel rammed into a Turkish vessel and killed a few sailors of Turkey. So Turkey prosecuted the French sailors despite opposition from France, and when the case reached the Permanent Court of International Justice, it upheld Turkey's right to prosecute the French sailors. And to nullify this very decision, 1952 Geneva Convention was set up, where the coastal states agreed not to prosecute vessels with other flags in the events of collisions. And the same thing, the same principle has been encapsulated in Article 97 of UN clause. So, any doubt on concurrent jurisdiction too is out of question, because UN clause's Article 97 gives the flag state preemptive jurisdiction to try these sort of events. Also, since the vessel isn't even carrying Indian flag, because the vessel wasn't even registered under the Merchant Shipping Act, the vessel can't traverse beyond territorial waters. So, Government of India has no proper locus standi. Salve then argued that the contention of India that since no law was enacted for UN clause, it's not binding on India is completely misconceived, because the Supreme Court has ruled in multiple matters that even if conventions are not legislated in India, they can still be enforced if they're not repugnant to municipal laws. And Salve referred to Maganbhai Ishwarbhai Patel and the Vikasha case to back up his claim. He then argued that the language of various enactments and the manner in which the same have been interpreted has given rise to the larger question of sovereign immunity. So, Salve argued, Section 2 and 4 of IPC and Section 179 of CRPC would stand excluded because of the aspect of sovereign immunity, because the Marines here were acting directly on the instruction of the Italian Navy. And they are not dependent on the commercial vessels. They are heavily independent, and they are not even answerable to the master of the ship. So they are under the direct command of the Italian government through the Italian military. To further strengthen the claim of sovereign immunity, Salve referred to a note verbale issued by the Italian government to the Ministry of External Affairs of India, where Italy affirmed its right to try the Marines because they were fulfilling their official duties, complying with national regulations, directives, instructions, orders, as well as the rules of piracy contained in UN clause and, most importantly, the relevant United Nations Security Council's resolutions. So, in essence, Salve's arguments are: 1. The question as to whether the sovereignty of India and consequently the penal jurisdiction of Indian courts extend to the exclusive economic zone. A reading of Section 6 and 7 of the Maritime Zones Act 1976 makes it clear that India's sovereignty extends over its territorial waters, but the position is different in the case of contiguous and exclusive economic zone. And the last and second one, the question as to whether Italians have the right to sovereign immunity. Now, the additional Solicitor General appearing for the United Nations focused on just two issues. 1. Whether the Indian courts can try the Marines under the Indian Penal Code. And 2. If they can, will the sovereign immunity save the Marines? Banerjee, who was the additional Solicitor General, started out by arguing that under the Eben Lloyd's case, the Supreme Court is empowered to interpret provisions of international law, and in Gramophone Company of India case 2, the Supreme Court held that in the absence of municipal law, the treaties conventions could not only be looked into, but could also be used to interpret multiple municipal laws so as to bring them in consonance with the international law. And effort must be made to harmonize international law with the municipal law, but in the event of a conflict, municipal law always prevails, and the approach of the petitioners to first rely on UN clause and then on the domestic law is totally misconceived and is contrary to public international law. Banerjee then argued in Eben Lloyd's case, the dispute in question was Section 7, Subclause 6, which empowers the Union government to extend laws concerning fiscal and custom enforcement, and in this case, the notification was issued under Section 7, Subsection 7, which empowers the Union government to extend any law in the economic zone. So, no parallel can be drawn with respect to jurisdiction of Union government because the powers flow from entirely different provisions. Banerjee then argued India can claim jurisdiction under two sections, one Section 7 Subclause 4 and another Section 7 Subclause 7. Subclause 4 because Clause B of Subclause 4 says that the Union government can enact laws concerning exploitation of resources, and presumably for Indians to exploit the sea, that area must be peaceful, and all IPC strives to do is maintain peace and stability in that region. So one can assume that the notification can also derive the power from Section 7 Subclause 4. The second one is Section 7 Subclause 7 because it clearly and categorically says the Union government can extend any law, and it did extend the Indian Penal Code. It's as simple as that. Banerjee then argued that the petitioners referred to Article 56, which prohibits the coastal state from exercising criminal jurisdiction, but the same petitioners failed to notice Article 59, which empowers the coastal state to assert rights or jurisdiction beyond those specifically provided in the convention. The additional Solicitor General then contended that a plain reading of the Maritime Zones Act, the Indian Penal Code, and the 1981 notification empowers India to enforce its criminal laws for up to 200 nautical miles, that is in all of economic zone. And by opening fire on the Indian fishing vessel and killing two of the Indian fishermen on board of St. Anthony within the contiguous zone, the Marines were made liable to be tried by the Indian courts under the domestic laws. On the question of jurisdiction of Kerala to try the offence, Banerjee submitted that since the incident had taken place in the contiguous zone off the coast of Kerala, Kerala courts derived jurisdiction in the matter from Section 183 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, which has also been extended to the exclusive economic zone by the 1981 notification, and it relates to offences committed on journeys or voyages. Section 183 here empowers the local courts to take cognizance and try offences if committed on the course of voyage, if such vessel passed through the jurisdiction of the local courts, and the voyage contemplated under said provision is not the voyage of Enrica Lexi, but the voyage of St. Anthony, an Indian registered ship. So, the local courts can try the case. He further argued, since it is established that the government can charge and try the case, Banerjee referred to Hukum Chand Mills and Sangeeta Theatre cases to remind the court that referring to a wrong provision of law to draw authority doesn't vitiate such exercise of power by the executive. I suspect the police here didn't refer to a proper provision while either conducting the investigation or arresting them, so it might be challenged by the petitioner. Banerjee then very cleverly argued that Section 4 of IPC applies to Indians or India registered ships on all the offences committed anywhere in the world and grants India the power to prosecute people involved in such offences. On the other hand, the words aboard and on board are not explicitly used in Section 4 of IPC. So, an unduly restrictive interpretation of the Section 4 would require both the victim and the perpetrator to be aboard the same ship, which could lead to dire consequences where pirate or hijacker or terrorists on ship with other country's flag fires upon an innocent Indian citizen within an Indian ship and he would escape prosecution in India. So to qualify as an offence under Section 4, crime must just happen on ship which has links to India. That is it. Mr. Banerjee then referred to Article 59, which deals with the resolution in cases of conflict regarding the attribution of rights and jurisdictions in the exclusive economic zone. And this Article 59 implicitly accepts that there are rights to countries beyond UN clause. However, even if it is assumed that these rights asserted by India are beyond those granted in Article 56 of UN clause, any such conflict would have to be resolved on the basis of equity. So, if both Italy and India had the power to prosecute the accused, it would be much more convenient and appropriate to conduct the trial in India, having regard to the location of the incident and the nature of the evidence and witnesses in the case. Then Banerjee argued Salve's invocation of Article 97 is entirely misconceived because it deals with, and I quote, incident of navigation, unquote. And this is an outright homicide by gunshot and not an incident of navigation. An incident of navigation means some mishap while maneuvering the ship. And in case of a collision, Italy might have had the claim to try the Marines, but in this case, under Article 97, Italy wouldn't even come into picture. Lotus case here holds true even until now for all incidents that are not incidents of navigation, and in this case principles of Lotus case must prevail. So India had the right to prosecute the Italian Marines. And then Banerjee argued when it comes to the aspect of sovereign immunity, yes, there is a commonly accepted standard of what sovereign immunity is, but each country gets to delimit for itself the bounds of sovereign immunity, and each country can create exceptions to it. On the same vein, if we look at Section 2 of the Indian Penal Code, it starts with, and I quote, every person shall be liable to punishment under this code, unquote. And the phrase every person in Section 2 indicates that nationality is irrelevant to such crimes. So, an American or Spaniard or Italian will be punishable under this code. Backing up his claim, he referred to Mubarak Ali Ahmed case, where the Supreme Court held that exercise of criminal jurisdiction depends on the location of the offence and not on the nationality of the alleged offender or his corporeal presence in India. So, subject to exceptions enacted by law, everyone can be tried in India if they commit an offence under the Indian Penal Code. Mr. Banerjee also referred to the United Nations Privileges and Immunities Act 1947 and the Diplomatic Relations Vienna Convention Act 1972, which gave certain diplomats, missions, and their members diplomatic immunity from criminal jurisdiction. Banerjee then argued that it is not the policy of Government of India to give diplomatic clearance to foreign arms or foreign private armed guards or foreign armed forces personnel accompanying merchant vessels, and it's also not in line with the policy of the Union government to enter into status of forces agreements by which foreign armed forces are given immunity from criminal prosecution. So, Marines are not entitled to claim sovereign immunity. And finally, Banerjee argued, if we look at it another way, Italy can claim sovereign immunity because these were not acts committed on the order of the sovereign, that is, government of Italy, but they are committed by right of management because it was excised to defend a vessel for commercial purpose. Next came the turn of state of Kerala, which was represented by V. Giri. So here Giri argued that the 1981 notification, which extended the provisions of CRPC to the exclusive economic zone, was prior to signing and ratification of UN clause in 1982. So, given this, despite the legislative competence of Parliament of India under Article 253 read with Schedule 7, Indian Parliament is empowered to enact laws to give effect to provisions and conventions and agreements. Despite this power, the provisions of UN clause have not yet been made part of the municipal law of India. On the other hand, after ratifying Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations and Warsaw Convention, Indian Parliament enacted Diplomatic Relations Vienna Convention Act 1972 and Carriage by Air Act 1972, precisely to give effect to the provisions of these conventions after ratifying them. But here, on the other hand, Indian Parliament has not enacted any law to give effect to the provisions of UN clause. So, provisions of UN clause cannot be read into India's municipal law. Giri further argued that in case of a conflict between the international law and the municipal law prevails. And backing this claim, he referred to the Biruba Union case where India was to exchange parcels of lands with Pakistan to settle a border dispute which inevitably included conceding some land of India, and on a reference made by the president to the Supreme Court seeking whether this conceding of land, this exchange could happen through the power vested in the parliament by the constitution, the Supreme Court had to look into the issue of enforcement of foreign conventions and agreements, and after looking into them, Supreme Court categorically held that conventions could be made applicable to municipal laws in India. True, but only upon suitable legislation by Parliament in this regard. Giri then submitted that if a treaty or an agreement or a convention does not infringe the rights of the citizens while trying to execute it, it is open for the executive to enforce such treaty or agreement. But if while trying to enforce it, the rights of the citizens or others are restricted or infringed, it amounts to modification of law. So, if the enforcement of the treaty infringes on existing laws, it can only be enforced after modifying it through the parliament through a legislation. Giri then submitted that if the provisions of UN clause were implemented without the sanction of parliament, it would amount to modifying and overriding the Maritime Zones Act 1976, and this act was enacted by the parliament using its sovereign power. Since there is no enactment despite parliament's power to enact provisions of UN clause, Maritime Zones Act would prevail in this situation. Giri then argued that it is now clear and established that India has jurisdiction to try the Marines, and state of Kerala has jurisdiction to try the Marines because section 179 and 183 of CRPC empower the local courts to try the Marines because the FIR was registered by the Neendkara police station and its jurisdiction. This too because Saint Anthony, the Indian ship, was docked and anchored at Neendkara. So naturally, Neendkara's police station has the jurisdiction to try the Marines. And Neendkara is a place in Kerala, so state of Kerala and consequently the police of Kerala have the right to try the Marines. Mr. Giri lastly argued that the fact that St. Anthony was not registered under the Merchant Shipping Act 1958 is of little consequence because the incident had taken place within 20.5 nautical miles from the Indian coastline, which is the contiguous zone, and it is also the exclusive economic zone of India. And these two zones are deemed to be part of Indian territory for the purpose of application of the Indian Penal Code and the CRPC. So the registration of ship in India would have mattered only if the event occurred on high seas. So all these arguments were presented before a division bench comprising of the then Chief Justice of India Altamas Kabir and Justice Chalameshwar. So this bench framed two issues. The first one was, is the Kerala police empowered to try the case? And the second one was between India and Italy, which country had the right to try the case? And both the judges gave concurring opinions. So first was the opinion of the Chief Justice of India. The former CJI delivered the judgments by first going through the facts, and he delivered, admittedly, the incident took place at a distance of about 20.5 nautical miles from the coastline of the state of Kerala, which is a unit within the Union of India. The incident therefore occurred not in the territorial waters of the coastline of state of Kerala, but in the contiguous zone. So the state of Kerala has no jurisdiction to try the Marines, and consequently Kerala police too had no jurisdiction to try the Marines, because it is Union of India which is empowered to extend the application of the penal code to all of exclusive economic zone and the contiguous zone. So it is the same Union of India which has rightful jurisdiction over the contiguous zone and the exclusive economic zone. So, Union of India alone has to take cognizance of the crime, it alone has to investigate, it alone has to prosecute anyone committing any infraction of domestic laws in the contiguous zone. And the submission that since St. Anthony started its voyage from Neendkara, and because of this, the police are empowered to investigate is untenable, because in crimes, cause of action is relevant, and the cause of action in this case occurred in the contiguous zone. Chief Justice Kabir also accepted Salve's arguments on the lack of jurisdiction of state of Kerala by virtue of it being a federal unit within a country, and since the Italians were also claiming sovereign immunity, the issue was elevated to an issue between two sovereign governments. So the Supreme Court held that a federal unit such as Kerala has no jurisdiction in interactions between two sovereign nations. Then, on the claim of Italy that India's actions were violative of Article 97, Justice Kabir said that Article 97 gives the flag state, in this case Italy, an exclusive right to prosecute the sailors if there is an incident of navigation. And this phrase, incident of navigation, only means a collision. And shooting someone from a ship is no collision. So, Italy has no rights under Article 97. And Chief Justice Kabir also said that the fact that St. Anthony was not carrying an Indian flag was irrelevant. Next, Justice Kabir delved into the application of Section 4 of Indian Penal Code, and he said that it is out of question. And with Section 2, he said if we look at Eben Lloyd's case, it empowers the Union of India to exercise its sovereign rights, not amounting to sovereignty. And this sovereignty doesn't extend all the way until 200 miles, but only until 24 nautical miles. So it only extends until the contiguous zone. So India can exercise its sovereignty in the contiguous zone. And by delivering this opinion, Justice Kabir rejected Banerjee's argument that India can exercise all sovereign rights until the 200 nautical mile mark. Lastly, Justice Kabir made a statement that enforcing penal jurisdiction is included in exercising sovereign rights. He essentially said enforcing penal jurisdiction is an inherent element of sovereign rights in the contiguous zone. Then Justice Chalameshwar delivered a concurring opinion and gave different reasons for trying Italian Marines in India by Indian authorities. Justice Chalameshwar opined that, insofar as India is concerned, the limit of the territorial waters was initially understood to be 3 nautical miles. It had then been extended subsequently up to 6 nautical miles by a presidential proclamation in 1952, and then again to 12 nautical miles by another proclamation in 1967, and finally through the Maritime Zones Act, the Parliament set the limit at 12 nautical miles. The same act also authorizes the Parliament to alter such limit of the territorial waters. So, excising this power, a legal fiction was created in the sea, and in this legal fiction, IPC would rule the ground as if it was a territory of India, and the Parliament is certainly empowered to create extraterritorial legal fictions, and in this case, Indian Parliament created that fiction until the 200 nautical mile mark in all of exclusive economic zone and the contiguous zone. Justice Chalameshwar then opined that under the Constitution of India, legislative authority is distributed between Parliament and state legislatures, while the state legislature's authority to make laws is limited to the territories of the state. Parliament's authority has no such limitation. Justice Chalameshwar then went on to state that under Article 245, Parliament can make laws for the territory of India, and subclause 2 of the same Article 245 expressly declares that, and I quote, no law made by Parliament shall be deemed to be invalid on the ground that it would have extraterritorial operation, unquote. So, subclause 2 of this article effectively empowers the Parliament to enact laws with extraterritorial applications. So, it effectively prohibits courts to declare a law to be unconstitutional or decline to give it any effect on the ground of extraterritoriality. And Justice Chalameshwar, with respect to application of criminal law, he said that it is a principle of 19th century English jurisprudence that all crime is local. and the jurisdiction over the crime belongs to the country where the crime is committed. But that principle is no longer accepted as an absolute principle because of the increased complexity of modern life and travel facilities and the large cross-border commerce, all of which made it possible to commit crimes whose effects are felt in territories beyond the residential borders of the offenders. So, states can claim jurisdiction if their legitimate interests are affected, even if offenders are not physically present within the jurisdiction. This is claimed on the basis of various principles of international law, such as the objective territoriality claim, the nationality claim, the passive personality claim, the security claim, the nationality claim, and a host of other things. Justice Chalameshwar then said that Section 2 read with Section 4 of the Indian Penal Code makes the provisions of the code applicable to offences committed, and I quote, in any place without and beyond the territory of India by a citizen of India or on any ship or aircraft registered in India, irrespective of its location, by any person not necessarily a citizen. So such a declaration was made as long back as in 1898, and further by the amendment of 2009 to the said section, the Indian Penal Code was extended to any person in any place without and beyond territory of India committing an offence targeting a computer resource located in India. One example of the government exercising this power is enactment of Anti-Hijacking Act, where the government can prosecute hijackers irrespective of their nationality, even if it is committed outside of India. Similarly, Section 3 of Geneva Conventions Act 1960 also provides that any person who commits or attempts to commit or abates or procures a commission by any other person of such grave breach of any of the conventions within or without India shall be punished. So Justice Chalameshwar said, it is clear that Parliament always asserted its authority to make laws which are applicable to persons who are not corporally present within the territories of India, whether or not they are citizens of India. And when such a person commits any act which affects the legitimate interests of this country, Government of India can prosecute them. In furtherance of such assertions, and in order to facilitate the prosecution of the offenders contemplated under Section 4 of the Indian Penal Code, Section 188 of the CRPC prescribes the jurisdiction to deal with such offences. Therefore, Justice Chalameshwar said, he is of the opinion that the Parliament undoubtedly has the power to make and apply laws to persons who are not citizens of India, committing acts which constitute offences prescribed by India, irrespective of the fact whether such acts are committed within the territory of India or irrespective of the fact that the offender is corporally present within or outside India. And the Supreme Court finally held that the investigation shall be conducted by a central agency controlled by the Union government, and it directed that the Marines be tried by a special court which was to be formed in consultation with the Union of India and the Chief Justice of India. And in this special court, Italy was allowed to raise the issue of exclusive jurisdiction of Italy and also the aspect of sovereign immunity. After the delivery of this judgment, initially the investigation was to be conducted by the CBI, Central Bureau of Investigation, but it was eventually transferred to NIA for workload issues. And here the NIA, the National Investigation Agency, sought sanction from the government to prosecute these two Marines under this law, which has very big name. It's called Suppression of Unlawful Activities Against Safety of Maritimes. After the delivery of judgment, CBI was supposed to carry on the investigation into the issue, but it was transferred to NIA, the National Investigation Agency, due to workload issues in the CBI. And here the NIA asked permission from the central government to charge these Marines under this safety legislation, which has a very big name, and it's called Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against Safety of Maritime Navigations and Fixed Platforms on Continental Shelf Act. And if charged under this act, the Marines have to be awarded only death penalty as punishment. And anticipating that the Marines would be charged under this provision, Italy approached the Union of India beforehand only and took assurance that they would not be charged under this act because it only attracts death penalty, and in the European Union, death penalty is completely abolished. And again, after the delivery of this judgment by the Supreme Court, in December 2012, the Kerala High Court also allowed the Marines to travel and stay in Italy for 2 weeks for Christmas after securing a bank guarantee of rupees 3 crores each. And later, again in February 2013, the Supreme Court allowed the Italian Marines to go and stay in Italy for 4 weeks to vote in the general elections on a personal guarantee by the then Italian ambassador. And after they reached Italy, the Italian government wrote a letter to India saying that they don't intend on sending back the Marines on due time to India. And this triggered a big diplomatic standoff with India restraining the then Italian ambassador. Yes, the Italian ambassador from leaving the country, and it ordered all the airports in India to not allow the Italian ambassador to leave India. But Italy later sent the Marines right before the date in March 2013. Then again in September 2014, one of the Marines filed an application in the Supreme Court and he sought permission to return to Italy for his medical treatment because he had suffered a stroke the previous month. And the Supreme Court on humanitarian grounds allowed him to go to Italy for a period of 4 months, and his stay was subsequently extended by the Supreme Court from time to time. If you come next year in August 2015, a 21-member panel of ITLOS, International Tribunal on Laws of the Seas. So ITLOS passed an interim order asking both India and Italy to suspend all court proceedings and refrain from initiating any new proceedings. Following which, the Union of India accepted to abide by the order and it requested the Supreme Court to suspend all court proceedings, and it eventually did. On top of this, ITLOS also referred this matter to an arbitral tribunal under Annex 7 of UNCLOS, and India and Italy was to go for Permanent Court of Arbitration. And Permanent Court of Arbitration, the PCA. Italy was primarily arguing on two issues. One, that India's legislation under which the Coast Guard exercised its powers is incompatible with UNCLOS. And two, India's exercise of jurisdiction over the Marines violated Italy's exclusive right to try the Marines as the flag state under UNCLOS. And Italy invoked the immunity of the Marines as state officials exercising official functions. In the PCA, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, Italy said the real issue in the case was which state had jurisdiction over the incident in the framework of UNCLOS. On the other hand, India argued that the real issue was whether the Marines were entitled to immunity from criminal proceedings, which India considered not to be covered by the treaty. So PCA had no jurisdiction to adjudicate on the issue, but the PCA sided with Italy and said that the real issue was which country has jurisdiction, but its judgment expressed otherwise, and we'll delve into that a little later. Interestingly, again, in these arbitration proceedings, India took a complete U-turn and it didn't justify its action using the Maritime Zones Act, but it relied on this commonly accepted principle called the territoriality principle. And India argued that since the shooting ended in an Indian ship and started in an Italian ship, India's jurisdiction smoothly extends to the Indian ship. And by virtue of this offense and also taking into consideration the territoriality principle, Italian ship would be assimilated into the Indian ship for the jurisdictional purposes. And this is the very essence of the territoriality principle. And the tribunal unsurprisingly accepted and upheld this claim, this argument of India, and it reasoned that since the relevant conduct, which was the killing of the fisherman, had begun on Enrica Lexi and completed on St. Anthony, India has the jurisdiction. And the tribunal also cited a few classic textbook cases of cross-border killings where international law says that both the countries have concurrent jurisdiction to try the offenders. So the Permanent Court of Arbitration effectively rejected Italy's claim that Maritime Zones Act is in question because, again, India wasn't even exercising its powers under the legislation, but through the principles of territoriality and passive personality. So Italy can't challenge the legislation of India. Then again, on the issue of violation of Article 97, just like the Supreme Court of India, the Permanent Court of Arbitration too held that issue of navigation doesn't include shooting from the ship, but only includes, I quote, movement and maneuvering of a ship, unquote. So all of Italy's arguments against India's exercise of jurisdiction, based especially on the provisions of UNCLOS, had been examined and rejected. So I'm repeating again, within the four corners of UNCLOS, the inevitable conclusion was that India had not violated any provisions of the convention. and it was well within India's right to exercise the jurisdiction over the Marines. Then the Permanent Court of Arbitration took a rather controversial decision. It took the issue of sovereign immunity as an incidental issue. And this assumption of arbiter of sovereign immunity is controversial because the Permanent Court of Arbitration was set up under Annex 7 of UN Clause to interpret and apply provisions of UN Clause. But under the provisions of UN Clause, India's actions were well within the bounds. So India had no problem. India didn't transgress UN Clause. And the PCA2 accepted that India didn't transgress the UN Clause. It didn't violate the provisions of UN Clause. But the Permanent Court of Arbitration took this issue under its consideration, this issue of sovereign immunity, and then delivered a conclusion that completely goes against India, despite India's actions being within the bounds of UN Clause. So this drew a lot of academic discussion and criticism on the assumption of jurisdiction by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And in the Permanent Court of Arbitration's award too, two of the five members strongly dissented the assumption of this jurisdiction on sovereign immunity. But the majority traced its jurisdiction to a phrase in the UN clause that says the tribunal can resolve issues concerning application of, and I quote, other rules of international law in the relevant provisions of UN clause. And on this issue, the Permanent Court of Arbitration held that the Marines were discharging their sovereign duty, so they are exempted from Indian jurisdiction. So for obvious reasons, this was a very controversial judgment. On the other hand, if we take a look at India's counterclaims, they claimed that Italy violated India's freedom of navigation by shooting down the innocent fishermen, and the Permanent Court of Arbitration upheld India's claim and it ordered Italy to compensate for loss of life, physical harm, damage to property, and moral harm of the Marines. So, in essence, the Permanent Court of Arbitration's findings are: 1. India and Italy had concurrent jurisdiction to try the Marines. 2. The Italian Marines were discharging official functions, so they had sovereign immunity. So Italy alone had the right to try the case against the Marines. And 3. India is entitled to compensation for loss of life, physical harm, damage to property, and moral harm. The story of the Permanent Court of Arbitration ended here. And in May 2016, when the Permanent Court of Arbitration proceedings were still pending, the second Marine too was allowed to stay in Italy for as long as the case was pending in the PCA, and the Union of India didn't oppose to their request. So after the award, Union of India accepted the arbitral award and it asked the Supreme Court to quash the case. But the Supreme Court said it won't quash the case until they hear the victims, and the center informed that Italy agreed to pay rupees 4 crores each and rupees 2 crores to the ship owner, and the Supreme Court said it will quash these charges once the amount is deposited. And the Supreme Court, after depositing the amounts, observed that Italy should start prosecuting the Marines in Italy, and the story ended here. So this was the story and these were the events that took place. And I'm always fascinated by these legal stratagems and these legal sleight of hands, and especially kudos to the brilliant mind that suggested India not to base India's exercise on power in the Permanent Court of Arbitration on the domestic legislation, the Maritime Zones Act. And this is exactly the reason why I started this podcast, because I wanted to share these brilliant arguments by the most able personalities in the field. On the other hand, I think the Permanent Court of Arbitration went a little overboard. It went out of its jurisdiction to decide on the Italian Marines, and I personally feel that the Marines should have been tried in India because they were clearly negligent. Even the evidence showed that they didn't follow standard protocol before firing on the innocent fishermen. And after that, Italy also used its very close Christian connections and its Catholic Church to force the fishermen here to withdraw the cases and accept the compensation. So these were all the things surrounding this very controversial event. So do you think the Italians should have been tried in India or by the Italian government? Share your thoughts on Twitter @HamletOfLaw. This is your host Naren Rudra, signing off.